today's Bloodhound questions. So this first one here is going to be pretty simple. What the Bloodhound user wanted to do is he's looking at the CCI and he kind of wants to create this trend state of the CCI. He wants to wait for the 6th bar after the CCI has crossed the zero line. So in other words, when the CCI has been above the zero line for 6 bars, then he wants to switch to a long state, right? He wants to say the market is in a long state. And then in order to flip into a short state, then once the CCI is below the zero line for 6 bars, then we'll flip to a short state. And actually there might be a short state here. See, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, yeah, see this little dip right here of the CCI was only for 5 bars, so that would not flip it to a short state. But over here where the arrow is, yeah, we have 6 bars where the CCI is below the zero line, so that would flip it into a short state. All right, now that screenshot that I showed you earlier, was using the Woody's CCI. Down a little bit further, there we go. So let's put the Woody's CCI on here. And it was a 14 period, the default, so we'll just leave that alone. And let's put that on our chart. There. So let's see. I already have Bloodhound on my chart here. So to open up Bloodhound, we're going to use the button on the top of your chart here. It says empty template, right? So Bloodhound is basically a blank slate right now. And I'm going to start working on the logic tab here so I can start working on the logic board. And the first thing we need to do is hit the new button, and that will create a new logic template for us. So let's see here. Yeah, basically we're kind of making a CCI 14 period, and it's a 6 bar trend state. That's kind of what we're making here. So the CCI, right, runs in its own sub panel here, right? So it has its own scaling. And so if we want to see, if we want to detect whether the CCI is above the zero line or below the zero line, we are going to use a threshold solver for that, right? So we want to know, is the CCI above the 0 threshold or below the 0 threshold level? So connect that in, and let's give this a name here. So it's a CCI 14 period 0, and we're comparing it to the 0 threshold. All right, give this some kind of a name there. So let's see, first thing we'll do is we'll plug in the CCI indicator here. And again, in this case, we're using the Woody CCI indicator to get the CCI value. And just remember, if you want to use something other than a 14 period, just make sure you change the settings here in Bloodhound so that they match the settings that you have on the chart, right? The indicator on the chart. So, all right, and then next, we want to make sure the CCI plot is selected, and it is already, so we're good to go there. At the same time, if you wanted to check the turbo and see if the, turbo, to see what side of the 0 line the turbo was on, then you could obviously select the turbo line. But all right, so let's put that back to the CCI. And right, our threshold value is the 0 line, so we're going to leave all of our threshold values at 0. And then for the outputs, right, we want a long trend state when the CCI is greater than 0. So we're going to turn this long output on, right? So greater than A, what is A? A equals 0 up here, right? So when the CCI is greater than 0, we want to turn that long output on. And we can see on the chart already, right, when the CCI is above the 0 line here, we're getting this long output. Right? And then for a short output, right, we want to know if the CCI is less than 0. And E, what does E equal? E equals this 0, all right, a threshold value of 0. So there we go. So basically our threshold solver is, identifying when the CCI is above 0 or below 0 here on the output. So now we just need to count the number of bars. We need to make sure that we have 6 bars above the 0 or 6 bars below the 0 value. Right? And to do that, the easiest way to do that, we could do that in 2 ways. We could use the signal counter, but the signal counter is not really necessary. Overdoing it a little bit, it'd be much easier just to use the look back node. So look back node is a lot simpler to set up. So we're going to use the look back node here. And we want to set the displacement to 0 and the look back period to 6 for 6 bars. And then the mode, well, we need a minimum of 6 bars of the CCI on one side of the 0 line or the other side of the 0 line. Right? So now, when we look at the output here, let me stretch this out a little bit. Right? So now, once the CCI, right, once it crosses that 0 line, when we get to the 6 bar, we now have, right, an output. So we're now in a long state because the CCI has been above the 0 line for 6 bars. And then once the CCI crosses below for 6 bars, now we're in a short state. So we could just keep it kind of like that, like this. And so we can see, right, every once in a while we're going to have these gaps where the CCI is kind of flip-flopping back and forth across the 0 line. So, and I think, the way I read the question as it was phrased is that it sounds like, he wants a trend state, right? Because there's no information regarding these kind of short periods of time here, right? These where there's a few bars where the CCI might cross the 0 line. So, so this is not mentioned at all in the question. So that leads me to think that he wants to set up a trend state. So basically, if we look at the whole question, right? So here, the CCI was above the 0 line for 6 bars. And so he wants to stay in a long trend until the CCI goes below the 0 line for 6 bars. All right, so this entire period, including these couple of bars here, right, where the CCI went below 0, he wants to include that in a long trend state for the market. There's a couple of bars over here. Actually, I think this right there, the CCI might have crossed the 0 line. Maybe there, it's kind of hard to tell, right? So if we want to kind of fill in, right, if we want to fill in these areas, right, where there's no signal like this, then we can do that. And actually, let me name this look back node here. So we have a 6 bar minimum. There we go. So this look back is basically looking for a 6 bar minimum. And so now to kind of take this and turn it into a trend state, that is what a toggle node is for, right? So we're going to toggle back and forth between a short state and a long state. So if we plug this into the toggle node, and the settings for the toggle node, the default settings here, basically are for flipping back and forth between states, right? So now we can see we're in a long state and I'm in a short state, sorry, right? And so all those little voids were filled in here. So when we're in this continuous short state now, and then a continuous long state, and then a short state, and then a long state. So we're now so now we have these continuous states that, right, in the long state versus short state only flips once we get 6 bars of the CCI on one side of the 0 line or the other side of the 0 line. So there we go. that was our first question. Fairly straightforward, pretty easy to do.